Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, welcome back to the High-Level Conference on Sustainable Development, Crime Prevention and Safe Societies. I would like to first introduce you to Mr. Jost Wagner, the conference facilitator for this event, and also Mr. Matti Jutsen, a rapporteur from the Thailand Institute of Justice. I would like to invite Mr. Wagner and our esteemed panelists to the stage. Our first panelist is Mr. Jeremy Douglas, the regional representative for UNODC for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Dr. Kittipong Kittayarak, Executive Director of the Thailand Institute of Justice, Mr. Isras Soonwunthorn, Secretary General of the Asean Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, Mr. U Ong Ki, Chairman of the Anti-Corruption Commission of Myanmar, and Dr. Surya Jindawong, Director General of Department of the ASEAN Affairs at Thailand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you.
Your Royal Highness, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to the first panel of our conference, Criminal Challenges to the Rule of Law and Stability in Southeast Asia. It's our first session. And my name is Jost Wagner. I'm going to be your guide through this panel as well as the two panels in the afternoon. We all hope you're going to stay with us for the important conversation we are having. And this session will be until 12:30. Then we are going to have a longer lunch for networking and the important conversations over lunch. And then we have two sessions in the afternoon and then a special report by our rapporteur, Dr. Mattis. So in September 2015, the UN General Assembly adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, incorporating crime prevention and criminal justice and related issues into the global development framework. So these goals, that's clear for all of us, will be only achieved with the cooperation of a broad range of stakeholders. Many of you are here in the room today. In Southeast Asia, a significant effort will be required to integrate related initiatives into national and regional development plans, drawing in criminal justice and public security experts and organizations as well as civil society. Understanding sustainable development through the criminal justice and public security lens means understanding the challenges to the rule of law in the region, be they criminal, social, or environmental. We have heard already that SDG number 16 is dedicated to the promotion of peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, the provision of access to justice for all, and building effective, accountable institutions of all levels. So in this session, we want to advance our understanding of the challenges to the rule of law in Southeast Asia. The focus will be on the criminal drivers and contributing environmental factors. But also we want to learn from countries and institutions in the region how they are addressing these challenges and explore some of the current deficits in the institutional capacity to respond to the need. So let me explain quickly how we're going to run the session. Each of our distinguished panelists got two guiding questions to prepare for some statement. If the time permits, I might follow up with one or two questions to some of the panelists, and then I will open up the floor. So I request you not to be too shy. We are interested in your thoughts as well. So if you would like to ask a question to the panelists, or if you want to make a short comment, so please do so. And let's see if we get a good conversation going. You might see a lady doing something strange in the back. This is Ms. Sukumal. Ms. Sukumal is a graphic recorder. She's trying to visualize key messages of what our panelists are saying, or even some of the key messages mentioned here by our distinguished participants. So with all the collective knowledge in the room, I am sure we're going to have a good conversation. And I would like to introduce one more time our panelists, and not only by their current function, but also a little bit about who they are and why are they sitting up here with me. So let me start in the order of appearance, so to say. Mr. Jeremy Douglas is a regional representative of the UNODC Office here for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and he's managing all the operations and strategy for Myanmar, to the Pacific in the areas of rule of law, non-traditional security threats, law enforcement, criminal justice, and drug-related supply and health issues. So prior to his appointment, he was also working in Pakistan and in different functions, I think in Vienna. So that's Mr. Douglas, and right next to me, I think he's no stranger to all of you here. Dr. Kittipong is the former Permanent Secretary for Justice from 2008 to 2014. He's known as one of the champions here in Thailand for the reform of the Thai criminal justice towards due process, the rule of law, and for pioneering the implementation of restorative justice programs in Thailand. And I think you all have heard by now about TIJ, so welcome, Dr. Kittipong. Our third speaker will be Mr. Isra Sunthornwood. He's the Secretary General for the Asean Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, in short, IPAR. He also looks back as a long career as a politician. I think you have been involved in politics in Thailand since 2001. So, for example, he was the Secretary to the Opposition Leader of the House of Representatives in 2 terms, the Deputy Secretary General to the Prime Minister, Tan Abhisit, and also the Vice Minister attached to the Prime Minister's office. And he is also a columnist still since long time for the Thai Post. And our fourth speaker will be His Excellency U Ong Chi. He is the Minister and the Chairman of the Anti-Corruption Commission of Myanmar. I recently learned this is a very new job, only has been in this job for 3-4 months. He's a retired Army General, and he used to be also the Minister for Labor, Social Welfare, Relief and Resettlement, the Minister for Information, and many other important postings. Welcome, sir. And last but not least, our fifth speaker will be Dr. Surya Chindawongsa. He's the Director General of the ASEAN Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Thailand, and he has, I did the math, approximately 23 years experience in the ministry, and he was in many different positions in the Department of ASEAN Affairs, so he's truly an expert, but he also was posted, for example, at the UN in New York and worked also in other departments in the ministry. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our distinguished experts. So let me start with Mr. Douglas, who has also prepared a few slides, and I would like to know a little bit about the challenges of the rule of law here in Southeast Asia. Mr. Douglas, please.
Thank you, Joost, and welcome once again, everyone. This will be a little less formal than we had in the past. I've had the pleasure of presenting a few, very few, challenges to the rule of law that were touched upon in the opening remarks of our esteemed opening speakers, Her Highness and Mr. Fedotov, the Executive Director of UNODC. The reason for presenting them in slides is to frame some of what we will hear from my colleagues here, but also to frame the later discussions about the SDGs and about where we should go forward with addressing the challenges here within the region. For those that follow me on Twitter, and I know a couple of you do, you would have seen this, and this is a very dynamic slide which presents to you, in essence, that the region has a number of dynamic transnational criminal flows which challenge it, and they challenge the institutions within this region. So on the slide, what you see is drug flows, environmental crime flows, human trafficking and migrant smuggling flows, counterfeit good flows. So the point being that as this region integrates, those flows change. The challenges change, which challenge the institutions which have to address those flows, be they the public security or the justice institutions. And they are significant. This region is home to what is known as the Golden Triangle. As many of you know, this morning we discussed with His Excellency the Deputy Prime Minister some of the challenges from the Golden Triangle and how we as a region and as a collective group need to address those challenges. And if you think about the volume of flows from that particular geographic point through the region, it has a significant effect on both the public security but the public health of this region, because the drug flows, of course, lead to public health crisis, they lead to public security systems that are overwhelmed by having to respond. So if we think of these different types of flows which are cascading across that map, we have to think about how do they in turn challenge the governments of this region to respond, and how do they challenge the civil society actors that are contributing to response. If we look at them a different way, financially, they are enormous in volume as well. We very conservatively estimate, and this is an older estimate from 2013, we very conservatively estimate that the transnational crime flows of this region amount to approximately 100 billion US dollars per year. Putting that in context within the Asean region, because this is the focus of our discussion here today, that exceeds the gross domestic product of several of the ASEAN countries. Of course, this volume of money which is moving through the region is not in the hands of any one individual. It's in the hands of many criminal groups or cascading across different forms of illicit economy. But that nonetheless has an enormous power within the region to challenge the states and also to contribute to other factors which we need to think about when we think of the rule of law. If we look at a specific flow, and I'm looking now at the trafficking for forced labor, if we look at it closely, so on the previous 2 slides ago, we saw that it was a flow which is dynamic, crossing many borders, but then we also saw that it has an enormous volume of economic impact, over a couple of $2 billion a year. We see that it's disproportionately impacting women and girls. But what does that tell us about the response that we need to have in place within the region? Are the police forces of this region, the justice officials of this region, well positioned to actually address the fact that it is disproportionately affecting women and girls? Do they reflect, in a sense, the challenge of the community around them? And of course, in this case, I'm thinking about the structure and the makeup of the police forces of the region, not because I'm on a panel of gentlemen, but as well, but also because we have to also acknowledge that addressing this, we have to understand it through the prism of the victims. And the victims here, disproportionately again, women and girls. Something very unique does happen as well. So what I've shown you before is research that we do within the United Nations, but others are doing research to understand the criminal flows, illicit economy flows which are taking place within the region, and they're looking at the capacities to respond to those. So The Economist, this map is helpfully provided by them, has looked at the illicit activities within this region and the capacities of the governments of this region to respond. And the capacities vary greatly. And as those of us who work in the development business to address illicit criminal activities know, those that perform these activities, those that are in the business of trafficking drugs or human beings, they tend to shift, or they have the ability to shift their operations to where capacities are lower. They can take advantage of vulnerabilities. And what we see in this region is a significant variability between the countries. On the one end, we know we have Singapore, which is one of the highest GDP states in the world with very high capacities to address what in essence are the challenges it faces as a city-state, versus other challenges that, say, Myanmar or Laos or Thailand may face with very fluid open borders. So there's great variability, and of course those flows affect those states and the institutions within them with great difference. Also, we have to consider those flows, or we have to consider the impact of corruption and the relationship to corruption on those illicit flows and how they may impact, how it may impact the states. This map is helpfully provided by Transparency International, which recently released an analysis, global analysis of corruption. What it tells us is that this region still faces significant challenges in relation to corruption. And it has, of course, an effect upon the institutions. It has effect on public integrity. And also, if we think about the social and economic environment, and we have some of the thinkers in the room in that regard, it also has a great impact on the level playing field, the access to public services, or the business environment that is within the region. So the corruption which is related to criminality has other impacts within the region. And as my final slide, I think I'd like to point out something as well in relation to the justice system. Her Highness has been doing some work with us in relation to prison issues through what's called the Bangkok rules and through the Mandela rules. And what we see if we look at the prison system is a responsive part of the system to deal with justice challenges, or some of those illicit flows that we see, is a significant issue in this region with criminal justice overcrowding. But of course we see the same through the policing systems and through the justice systems. As a result of transnational criminal activity, in this case primarily related to drugs because of the prevailing drug policy framework and the prevailing challenges of the drug issue, particularly around the Golden Triangle. But in the case of synthetic drugs, we see this around the region where it's being produced. So we see in some countries as significant as 400% overcrowding, or we see in some countries 150%. In this particular country that we're in now, we know that this country has 40% of the prison population of the Asean region within it. But this country only has 10% of the population of the region. This tells us that the system is overwhelmed. And if we look within that data again, we can also see that the institutions are particularly challenged to deal with women and girls because the prison systems were not established. They're very standardized, not established necessarily with their needs in mind. So with that, I will close. I think I've just kind of framed, I think, what might be touched upon by some of my colleagues here, this esteemed panel, which I'm lucky to be a part of, framed a little bit of what they may touch upon. But what we've seen, again, are these types of challenges that are cascading through the region. We've seen the volume of money that is generated and how that can impact. But we've also seen, of course, how does that impact the variable capacities? How does it impact the systems that are meant to respond? So with that, I thank you, Mr. Wagner, for the opportunity to frame a bit of the discussion here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douglas, and thank you for highlighting some of the very important challenges we are facing here in the region. And I think some of our speakers will address or explore some of these challenges in more detail. And I have the pleasure now to hand over to Tan Kittipong, and we asked him also a little bit to elaborate on the work TIJ is doing and how they contribute to understanding criminal challenges in the region. Tan Kittipong, please.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for me to be here among esteemed experts on this panel. On behalf of TIJ, I'm very pleased to be able to contribute to this panel discussion on the topic of the challenges to the rule of law in Southeast Asia. TIJ has been working recently on the new trend on the development-led approach in crime prevention and criminal justice. So on this panel, I hope to be able to share with you our new research that gearing toward this direction. And I'm very glad that the theme of our conference today is on sustainable development, the rule of law, and safe society, because I think these three elements are linked together and are mutually reinforcing. And with the adoption of the SDG, I think that there is no better time that we could focus our discussion on this new aspect. We have already seen progress in several areas in Southeast Asia region. Economically, the ASEAN region is the sixth richest economy in the world. In respect of the protection of human rights, a number of mechanisms and instruments have emerged to promote the rights of individuals, particularly in respect of vulnerable groups such as women, children, and persons with disabilities. However, this region, like many parts of the world, continues to be challenged by the problem of violence of crime. Countries in Southeast Asia are not immune to the problem of violence against children and women, which remains a global problem. The situation is even more complicated in the context of human trafficking. In a studies conducted jointly by the Thailand Institute of Justice and the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime on trafficking in persons from Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar to Thailand, we found that many child victims of sexual abuse and labor exploitation come from poor rural areas. Lack of access to education and lack of economic opportunities remain the driving forces which push individuals to take risks and even break the law when they feel they have no other means or choices available to them. This lack of opportunity makes certain members of society, particularly women and children, more vulnerable to victimization. Against such a complex reality, we can realize that the law and the criminal justice system alone may not be a durable solution for fighting against violence and crime. Access to social and economic development should therefore be a part of a strategy to prevent and respond to crime and violence if we are to address these problems while doing justice to the complexity of their root cause. Initiatives to address the root cause of crime and violence have emerged in our region actually over a long period of time. I want to share with you an experience from Thailand where 50 years ago, the heart of the Golden Triangle was a major region of opium production. The local farmers were living in poverty and lacked opportunities for economic development. The situation forced many people to rely on the illicit cultivation of opium poppy. The alternative development approach, pioneered by His Majesty the late King Bhumibol Adulyadej of Thailand, has transformed the life of the people involved in this illicit livelihood, not through the strict implementation of the law, but through addressing fundamental needs such as health, education, and other basic support prior to the use of law enforcement. This alternative to development approach, which has been for a long time, proved to be very efficient for drug eradication, also paved the way to the development-led approach to be applied in a broader area of criminal justice and crime prevention. This new approach made possible the subsequent assistance programs aimed at addressing the lack of social and economic opportunities as well as other vulnerabilities. When access to development opportunities is provided, it became a whole new game where community members share a sense of ownership and an awareness of the need to adhere to the rule of law and a culture of lawfulness. In the same way, apart from the context of crime prevention, I believe this development-led approach may also be useful in the context of treatment of offenders. As Her Royal Highness mentioned this morning, no one wants to commit crime. By being victimized by the lack of access to economic and social opportunities, some people have taken a wrong path in their lifetime. Rehabilitation programs, therefore, need to take into account this element of lack of access to opportunities by providing offenders with adequate care, education, and vocational training. A number of prison pilot projects have emerged in the region, including at Doi Rang Open Prison in the north of Thailand, with a focus on providing offenders with opportunities to return to the society with capacity and with dignity. Our experience, beginning from 50 years ago up to recent years, reminds us of the need to think about the tools and opportunities that we have today in our region to address the root cause of crime and violence by using such a developmental approach as a guide. In my presentation, I would like to draw attention on three key opportunities. Let's begin with the SDGs. The Sustainable Development Goals provide a comprehensive framework for us to tackle violence and crime in an integrated way by taking into account social values such as good health, well-being, quality education, the elimination of poverty, and the achievement of gender equality. In this sense, the SDGs provide us with the right mindset for thinking about the criminal justice system and crime prevention in a more interrelated way and in a wider context. As such, when we talk about the rule of law or about the problem of crime and violence, we should not confine the conversation within the criminal justice system. Solutions to those problems may be found through the partnership among a broader set of stakeholders and through active engagement with a wider development agenda across all sectors. For this reason, we at the TIJ have been engaging with partners beyond justice officials and legal professions in order to enlarge the circle of actors and agents for change in support of research and policy making under the rule of law and the culture of lawfulness. At TIJ, we have been working for a number of years on what we call the Rule of Law and Development, or ROLE program. The program is designed to broaden the perspective of emerging scholars and policymakers from both the public and private sectors about the rule of law and policy making in a variety of disciplines. The program includes a series of training sessions and intensive workshops in collaboration with the Institute of Global Law and Policy of Harvard Law School. In this slide, I am pleased to welcome members of the ROLE program for the year 2017 and 2018 who are with us here today among the participants of this conference. Secondly, we have the ASEAN's vision of 2025, which embraces the value of participation of all sectors by emphasizing inclusive communities that promote a high quality of life and equitable access to opportunities for all. Recently, ASEAN has taken a step further to strengthen crime prevention within the broader framework of sustainable development by adopting the Declaration on a Culture of Prevention. during the ASEAN summit last November. This declaration recognized the values of understanding the root cause of violence and seek to address them by, among others, enhancing youth engagement and the role of family, community organization, and educational institutions. Finally, I believe the tools and opportunity for our region also lie in the fact that ASEAN is now a rule-based community guided by ASEAN Charter. The Charter emphasized the value of human rights and good governance to enhance the well-being and livelihood of people by providing equitable access to opportunities for human development, social welfare, and justice. From this, we can see that the fundamental requirements for the rule of law are already in place within the framework of ASEAN. The rule-based approach, when combined with the core values of human rights and people-oriented and people-centered approach, will create a necessary framework for stakeholders to address crime and violence at its root. However, there remains a lot to do to strengthen ASEAN rule-based community. One of the challenges is in the area of crime prevention and criminal justice, particularly when the globalization and ASEAN integration call for significant enhancement of cooperation among players in our region. As an attempt to fill this gap, the first ASEAN Conference on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, or ACCPCJ, was established on the first, and the first conference was organized in Bangkok in November 2016. The conference served as a platform for member countries and stakeholders to discuss common challenges to enhancing crime prevention and criminal justice. The momentum needs to be maintained, and the cooperation among all relevant sectors needs to be enhanced in order to strengthen our rule-based communities for the benefit of everyone, which is the ultimate goal. To conclude, we all know that countries in the ASEAN region are not immune to the problem of insecurity. However, opportunities for meeting these challenges do exist. Solutions to crime and violence can be found in a broader development scheme with the engagement of all sectors. This framework already exists within the ASEAN structure and within its member countries. It is for all of us to decide how we can make the best use of it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Please give a hand to Tan Kittipong. Thank you very much, sir, for reminding us that we have to tackle the root causes, and that also reminding us of the very successful development-led approach you have conducted here in Thailand. And I think Thailand is very worldwide known for that approach, and also that we have to develop a culture of prevention. Without further ado, I would like to go on to our next speaker. He is actually, as you have learned, a very experienced parliamentarian. And we would like to know a little bit more about the role of parliamentarians, and especially here in ASEAN, what can ASEAN parliamentarians as a group do to address criminal challenges and provide for the rule of law in our region? Kun Israel, please.
Thank you, Joss Wagner. Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished speakers, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to thank the TIJ and UNODC for inviting me here on behalf of the ASEAN parliamentarians to participate in this high-level conference. It's very important that we all get together and we talk about the matters that matters to us in Southeast Asia. Before going into my topic and talking about what I wanted to talk about, let me give you a brief overview of what IPA, or the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, is. Because I'm pretty much sure that most half of you here have never heard of IPA before. So just to give you a little background on this. IPA was formed 40 years ago on September 2nd. We were formed 10 years after the formation of ASEAN. We were formed to be a panel or a venue where the parliamentarians of ASEAN can come and speak on behalf of the peoples of ASEAN about ASEAN matters. If you have the executive branch, we are the legislative branch. We consist of over 3,500 members of parliament, or parliamentarians, in all over ASEAN. If you are a sitting member of parliament in the present, you are automatically a member of IPA as it is. If you are former MPs, like myself and Kun Kittipong sitting there, then you don't count. You have to wait till you become MP again, and then you become an IPA member again as well. To provide a better picture of the role of IPA, if ASEAN is the executive branch, like I said, we are the legislative branch, and pretty soon there's going to be the judicial branch. To get a better picture of what IPA is, try to picture ASEAN as as a Formula One car, if I may. It's sleek, it's expensive, it's eye-catching, and people like to look at it, it's sexy, right? The peoples of ASEAN are the driver that makes it move. So what does that make IPA? Well, what is IPA at that role? IPA is the pit crew. It's the engine that makes ASEAN run, if I may. Because during the summits and during the leadership forums and so on and so forth, when the executives meet and they have their handshake and they have policies of the land, they need laws to make it happen. They need the national laws to make it happen, and that's the role of IPA. That's the role of the ASEAN parliamentarians, to harmonize laws within the region. But that's a different thing from coming up with an ASEAN parliament. Many people think IPA is here to make an ASEAN parliament. That is another 50, 60 years of more negotiation. But as of now, we are here to harmonize laws within the region. To go back to this question of what is the potential of ASEAN and ASEAN parliamentarians as a group to address criminal challenges and provide for the rule of law in Southeast Asia. One thing that has to be understood in the structure of ASEAN, it's almost like the structure of the United Nations itself. There's one ruling United Nations, and then there are UNODC, UNICEF, so on and so forth, the many acronyms that fall underneath the umbrella of the United Nations. It's the same thing as ASEAN. ASEAN is the main body, and underneath them are acronyms under ASEAN itself. IPA is one of the acronyms underneath ASEAN itself. The reality of working as an acronym or an entity under ASEAN is, if I may humbly steal the words of Your Royal Highness from this morning, of how the problem of international organizations of people working in silos and isolation. That is one of the problems of ASEAN itself, is that the ASEAN Secretariat, we're not talking about ASEAN as the region, but the ASEAN Secretariat and the entities and the organizations under ASEAN work in different silos, and sometimes it's not overlapping one another itself. Not even the entities don't overlap, but the problem within the ASEAN Secretariat itself is that the pillars between the Deputy Secretary Generals don't overlap as well. So if you talk to one person under this pillar, that doesn't mean the other pillars will follow what that pillar says. So you have to talk all over again with the other pillars, and it doesn't mean that they will agree to what the original pillar said. So sometimes it's inner conflict or inner silos within the organization itself, which makes working very difficult. So the problem that we have with IPA and with many entities and many organizations under the ASEAN umbrella is trying to get on the same agenda as the ASEAN Secretariat. Because sometimes we're not in the loop. We're not put in the loop. If they are working on their own silos, we are in our own silos as well. We are in our own little world, talking amongst ourselves. What I'm trying to do for IPA is to try to integrate the silos, try to make the bubbles overlap one another so that there is that interaction between each other. To harmonize laws within the region, to address commonalities, you have to have a common issue that we all have to rally around. What the problem that we have in ASEAN and the entities and the organizations underneath is that we're all fighting different things. And also we're all fighting each other. But we're fighting different things. And there's no common agenda where we can all rally around something. For IPA, one of the problems that we have is we have a General Assembly every year, around September-ish. And what we have is that we talk about huge, broad global issues. Beautiful words, beautiful topics. But then nothing concrete really happens because we never tackle anything regional. What I'm trying to do for IPA, and within ASEAN itself, is to try to, instead of talking about climate change, poverty, let's try to do something regional first and show that we can work together instead of not working with one another. One of the topics that we're very interested in is in trafficking in persons, conservation, child protection. From a political standpoint, we're trying to find issues that is impossible to say no to. Because in ASEAN, as we all know, it has to be a consensus. And a consensus doesn't mean 9 out of 10. If one country says, maybe, that means no. That means defer and talk about it another lifetime, actually, and nothing happens. So what we're trying to do now is we're trying to make things regional, make things topical that have to do with the ASEANer, the ASEANite, the ASEANese, to make it more realistic. And one of the issues, like I said, is child protection. And we're moving in that direction to do something about child protection. So the general answer, which is hard to answer this question, of what is the potential is there for ASEAN and ASEAN parliamentarians to work on a common goal. It's just who is going to push for that? Who is going to want to gather all the ASEAN entities together? What I'm trying to do is gather the ASEAN Law Association, the ASEAN University Network, and provide this network within the entities to work as one. But like I said, there needs political will to make this happen. There needs to make this reality to make this happen. And hopefully we're putting in the initial stages to make this happen. Because what I'm trying to do, or what we're trying to do, is to finally make ASEAN more people-centered. Finally make ASEAN more people-oriented. Because one of the problems that we face in ASEAN now is that we talk amongst ourselves. We talk in our summits, we talk in our organizations, we talk in our entities, we talk in our silos. But the people don't feel as one. The people don't feel any as a stakeholder at all. And as parliamentarians, what we're trying to do is trying to speak on behalf of the peoples of ASEAN, to make the peoples of ASEAN feel that they have a stake or share into the future of ASEAN. So that's the broad answer to this question. I don't know if I answered the question, but that's what I said. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tan Isra. Please give a hand to our speaker. And thank you for making the plea for finding common issues. And I think you mentioned some that really concerns this audience, like trafficking of person or protection of children. Let's go straight to the next speaker, and I would like to hear from our next speaker a little bit about how they are tackling corruption in Myanmar. So, His Excellency U Aung Chi, maybe can you share a little bit your thoughts? It's, as I mentioned before, 3 months in office. Maybe you also tell us a little bit your vision for your commission. The floor is yours.
Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to be invited as a speaker to this conference. My name is Aung Chi, Chairperson of Anti-Corruption Commission, Myanmar. I would like to address the complexities of conflicts, drugs and human trafficking, informal economy and corruption, their threats to the Southeast Asia region, and institutional challenges to counter these threats by sharing my experience in Myanmar. Our commission is trying to subdue corruption in our country, but our effort is still isolated and disconnected from the multiple factors surrounding corruption. We understand that corruption facilitates drug trafficking, money laundering, human trafficking, illicit trade of natural resources, including natural gas, mining, lodging, and fishing. These are impediments for the development of human society in Southeast Asia region. Moreover, arms conflict and some serious conflicts, such as political, ethnic, or moral conflicts, are growing trends of extremism and informal economy, which become an invisible hand debilitating formal economy. These conflicts create demands to finance their operations and sustainability. In this way, some conflicting parties become involved in illicit activities, not simply limited to legal trades. They become part of informal economy, influencing the dynamics of the formal economy, especially where government institutions are weak. Corruption is always associated with the weakened institutions, and weakened law enforcement bodies are less capable in rule of law in the country. The relationship between arms conflict and drugs is a well-known fact for all of us. Ceasefire may be seen as a cool-off period for arms conflict. But what we recognize is during the ceasefire period in Myanmar, the seizure of amphetamine multiplied 16 times from 2011 to 2016. It is a pivotal element facilitating not only the operations of illegal trades, but also their impact on formal economy. And thus, corruption could destabilize democracy, weaken the country's rule of law, and stall the development. Addressing these complexities, I have confidence to say we need more anti-corruption efforts in most of the countries in Southeast Asia region. Institutions tackling these challenges are ill-resourced and not well coordinated, even within a country, let alone at regional level. We need a concerted effort to effectively deter challenges coming from interlinking criminal enterprises. This is a job no country can do it alone. We need to mobilize interagency efforts at international level to address these challenges. Finally, I would like to stress that we need to have a clear understanding of the mechanic of interconnected criminal enterprises, armed and other widespread conflicts, corruption, and their linkage to formal economy. Perhaps our regional partners may coordinate to launch a major study to understand more on these complexities so as to help preventing crimes and ensuring safety in Southeast Asia region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your call for better coordination or more concerted efforts for anti-corruption efforts, but also for many other things here we are tackling. And the last speaker is actually, as I mentioned, an expert on ASEAN because he has been in the ASEAN department, which he is heading now for quite a long time. So we would like to know from you a little bit how ASEAN can shape responses to criminal challenges in Southeast Asia. Tan Surya, please.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen. ASEAN is worth it. I say that not because I come from the ASEAN department, but because of looking at the historical record. After all, the 10, we grew up as a association of 5 at a time of great conflict in Southeast Asia in the 60s, if you recall. And it's of course a reflection, revealing my age here when I say that. But we are now a community of 10, anchored on rule of law, anchored on common interests, and on shared values. Not all, because we are diverse. But this is the path that 10 countries in Southeast Asia has decided to take, and it will continue. ASEAN is a never-ending story. It's not a chapter that has to be read just piece by piece, but rather an evolutionary tale where you look at both its drawbacks and assets. And I think we are heading in the right direction. So that's the first statement I'd like to say about ASEAN within the context of this very important meeting, bringing together rule of law, sustainable development, criminal justice, crimes, and safe societies. But having said that, ASEAN is imperfect. there are a lot of things that need to be changed. Let's go through its imperfections. I think that's where the analysis must be undertaken. Let's look at its imperfections from a perspective of rule of law, sustainable development, crime prevention, safe societies. Rule of law. We have the ASEAN Charter. In fact, the aspirations are clear. The Bangkok Declaration, written in 1967, very interestingly, as one of its main purposes and aims of ASEAN, Article 2.2, to promote regional peace and stability through abiding respect for justice and the rule of law. Respect for justice and the rule of law in the relationship amongst countries of the region and adherence to the principle of the UN Charter. I think from the very beginning, from its conception, ASEAN is anchored on these important principles. We then have the Charter that was adopted and put in force about a little over 10 years ago. Article 7, to strengthen democracy, enhance good governance and the rule of law, and to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms, with due regard to the rights and responsibilities of the member states of ASEAN. So, aspirational-wise, legally speaking, we are committed to these instruments. Of course, the question is how we translate these aspirations into things that matter on the ground. And there, I think, is the imperfections of ASEAN. Rule of law, for example, the tradition of ASEAN member states applying the rule of law individually is pretty high. But the tradition of the 10 countries coming together and then applying rule of law consistently is perhaps less historically based than individual member states. For example, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, which is supposed to make sure that the 10 countries are at peace, has never been activated, despite conflicts between a couple of countries now and then. This is the tradition of ASEAN, which I think is changing. We now have a charter, we have a Vision 2025 that tries to instill and inculcate the sense of rule of law, not only in ASEAN policies, but also in individual member states supporting that policy. And that is where the role of IPA, the parliamentarians, is very important, because you really need that national legal backup in order to make sure that ASEAN agreements are enforced. And that is the key, the second imperfection, enforcement. 10 countries have to agree. And if one doesn't, we don't have a consensus. Policies, important implementations of agreements, if they are not implemented, how can we enforce it? That is, I think, the challenge of ASEAN. We are still, the ASEAN community is very much what we call capital driven by member states. The ASEAN Secretariat, for all its great achievements, has still limited powers and mandates, vastly different from the European Commission. Just to give you an example, there's only 300 people in the ASEAN Secretariat, there's about 30,000 in the European Commission. And then we are not really in a situation where we are not a supranational organization, we are an organization of member states. So this is where the imperfections are. We don't want to be a supranational organization, but we try to do the very best we can based on limitations that we have. Let's look at sustainable development. Member states have been doing this for quite some time. But ASEAN as a group has just started since 2016. That's about 2 years ago. The idea of linking ASEAN community building, making it mutually reinforcing with the sustainable development goals. This is a new concept. The idea of making sure that the community building process of ASEAN leaves no one behind. This is a new concept. And this has just started. So we are imperfect. We are trying to develop things. What we're trying to do in ASEAN is to develop what we call cross-pillar catalysts. How can we make sure you kill two birds with one stone? On the one hand, you build the community that is people-centered, and on the other hand, you meet the SDGs. I think that is what we're trying to do within the sustainable development arena. Now, going to crime prevention, criminal justice, as has been, we've worked with Jeremy for quite some time. The statistics are very telling. As ASEAN becomes more integrated as a community, as we have greater connectivity, the potential of transnational crimes will increase. Why? Because right now there is an imbalance between what we call enhanced cooperation to facilitate border movements of goods and services and people, and on the other hand, a border management system in order to safeguard the ASEAN community from those who might wish to abuse it. And this is why, this is again a new phenomenon, Jeremy. We've been working on this for a couple of years, trying to develop a enhanced border management system within ASEAN. Why? To protect the community from those who might wish to misuse the integrated and connected ASEAN community, and therefore, as a result, to fight against transnational crime. So these are some of the things, and of course, being a safe society, this is of course part about human security. ASEAN is definitely committed to that. We have blueprints that deal with it, and we try to do many things that will help advance safer societies. But what can we do in the long run with the challenges that ASEAN face? We have to come together. The aspirations are there. We have to implement our blueprints that we have agreed to, and we have to connect the various three pillars of ASEAN, the ASEAN political security community, economic community, and socio-cultural community, because they address different parts of the rule of law, sustainable development, crime prevention, and safe societies aspects, which this conference is bringing together. So that, I think, is the key to ASEAN, trying to bridge the various pillars that are working on this, and to try to make it a truly multi-stakeholder effort. It is a long process. ASEAN is imperfect, but ASEAN is here to stay, and we will try to do the best we can for the region to promote rule of law, to promote sustainable development, crime prevention, and safer societies for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tan Surya. ASEAN is worth it. I like this quote, and ASEAN is also imperfect, but you also shared some insights how to overcome them. It's also worth to ask some questions, and I was informed I get an extra 10 minutes. As you hear from my accent, I'm German, so to go over time is always something which makes usually the average German a bit nervous, so I want to be on time, but we have 10 minutes extra. So I want to open the floor right away. I had some tricky questions prepared for the panelists, but actually I would like you to help me. So if you have a question or a short comment, don't be shy. Please identify yourself, and maybe we collect 2 or 3 questions or comments, and then I will hand over the question to the appropriate person. So the floor is open. I hope I don't have to bring out my very tricky questions. Yes, please identify yourself.
Thank you. My name is Natapanu. I'm a participant in the Role program of TIJ. I have 2 questions. The first is the issue of the difficult issue in the region of corruption. Just last week or a few weeks ago, countries were rated by the Corruption Perception Index, and it still remains a very difficult issue. And in Asia, corruption is somehow part of culture, and words used to describe it is perhaps expected compliance, or just getting things done, or taking care of each other and hosting tea. So my question is, how can institutions like IPA or other institutions start to harmonize laws or build up a new standard, a regional standard that will also address issues like corruption in the corporate world as well, considering the culture of corruption that exists in regions like Asia. And my second question is, in some countries in Asia, life imprisonment is still a lawful sentence for offenses committed while under the age of 18, so children. Imprisoning youths can also be counterproductive, of course, and cause stigmatization throughout life. What can be the possible alternatives? Thank you.
Thank you very much. 2 very interesting questions. Maybe I take one more and then we do a round of answers. These are very difficult questions. Of course, I need much more time. Anybody else? Okay, maybe then I ask our panelists. So the first one was about corruption, harmonizing law here in the region, for example. And the second one was about life imprisonment for people, or for youth. So what can be done about that? So anybody would like to respond first? Hong Chi, you would like to respond to the first one?
Thank you for your question. First of all, I would like to express sincerely that we are just starting to draft a strategy on anti-corruption with the assistance of UNODC, and I hope it will be accomplished within 6 months or more. In that strategy, obviously, our vision, our objectives, and our ways of tackling anti-corruption will be stated. But for this moment, I would like to express only on our 2018 action plan, because we are just discussing about how to handling the anti-corruptions in our country and to be a part, to participate as in the Southeast Asia region. So this year, we are start implementing 2018 action plan, and we make two-pronged strategy to have anti-corruption measures. One is passive measures, and it is simply accepting complaints and scrutinizing those complaints, and then investigations and prosecutions. That's what we call passive measures. And we are trying to accelerate these passive measures. At the same time, we have other prongs. That is our preventive measures, our prevention on the crimes on and corruptions. So, according to our preventive measures, we start with education at the informal education or informal education, formal or informal. At the formal education, we have already taken within these 3 months a footstep to educate on integrity, starting from the primary level and upwards. And then we have already discussed with the Ministry of Education to make a half-day program to every schools throughout our country, nationwide, to make an edutainment on anti-corruptions. That will promote the integrity of our future generations, and this will surely prevent and coming decade on corruptions. And other proactive measures in prevention is to make accountability under civil service reforms. And also, we are developing CSO-friendly as well as media-friendly environment in addressing social impact on corruptions. At the same time, we are developing our anti-corruption policy framework as well as legal framework. Our legislative reform is also revising the Anti-Corruption 2013 and make more improvement to get the power of tackling the corruptors. Then another measure is strengthening manpower by means of in-country and international capacity building programs. And lastly, on enhancing international cooperation through UN agencies and multilateral, bilateral programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ong Chi, for sharing the Myanmar experience. Maybe a quick response from Israel, and then Surya, you also wanted to share some 2 sentences.
Thank you so much. Because Gunning said IPA, so I have to answer, because he mentioned me by name. Anyways, corruption is basically a reflection on what that society is. If that society is very, for lack of a better word, honest or accountable itself, and they'll treat corruption very seriously. But if that society is very lax and it treats corruption as being part of business and a way of life, then the rules and laws and rule of law or the rules of society will reflect the rules that they write out. Because in reality, rules and laws are words on paper that humans write up to determine what is right and wrong, and to keep our societies as civil as possible. But it depends on the heart of the society itself and the basis of that society of whether they really believe those words on paper. So if you talk about IPA or ASEAN as a body, without mentioning names, you know that there are some countries that treat corruption very harshly, and they take it to heart, where some countries are very lax on it. So as a body, it's very difficult to have one basic rule when we're so diversified towards this subject itself. But every society has to have the basis to fight against corruption. It just depends on whether that society thinks it's just business or thinks that it's not business.
Maybe a short comment by Surya.
One sentence, right?
Two.
Okay, two sentences. Well, let me put it this way. I think issues like anti-corruption would require that interplay between national efforts, regional cooperation, and adherence to multilateral conventions that we have. We know fully well that anti-corruption measures are most successful if done on a national basis, and this was referred to by Kun Isra. This has to be done, it has to be part of the culture. Regional context, there have been efforts. It is in the Blueprint 2025. The CPAC, the Southeast Asia Parties Against Corruption, there are activities, but they're basically, I think Your Excellency may agree, it's basically in terms of sharing best practices and trying to get that sharing of information and data will be helpful. But in terms of having a regional law, that's a little bit more difficult, and that's why we would have to rely more on the multilateral setting. We have the UN conventions on this. So it's a combination. As a practitioner, I think it doesn't matter which one you use as long as you have the right combination and solve the problem of anti-corruption and solve the problem of corruption. I think that's the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Maybe one, Jeremy, can I ask you maybe for alternatives about life imprisonment for people under 18?
Sure, and actually maybe as I put up a slide to this effect, maybe I'll reflect on the reasons for prison overcrowding and how that impacts youth in this region. So as I mentioned, due to the drug policy framework in place within the region, we tend to have an overcrowding problem. And that actually that's also in the youth justice system. The drug issue impacts the youth justice system significantly. And we see the reason for the overcrowding is essentially very long-term sentences that are applied for what many people would consider relatively minor crime. And what that results in is lost human capital and an inability for people to rehabilitate themselves. So there are some good initiatives underway. For example, Khemlomjai, the Inspire program here in Thailand, which is piloting the Bangkok rules and the work of TIJ to pilot the Mandela rules in a couple of prisons here in the country, as well as looking at how the prison setting can be reformed. But then there's also the other aspect which I touched on, which is the policy reform, which needs to take place to address the overcrowding issue. So what I would say is we would encourage, as the United Nations, a reflection on the policy framework that is in place so that the states can alleviate the pressure that they have placed upon the prison systems and release, hopefully, the human capital that is within those prison systems. Because the region as well is in some countries has, for example, a labor shortage, and the people can't necessarily contribute to society because they aren't within it, they're isolated from it. So there's an opportunity there to release that human capital back into society through changing the way that these issues are managed and changing the way that the prisons themselves are managed as well. I trust that answers the question.
Yes, Tan Kittipong.
Just one sentence too. The society probably believe that the severity of punishment will make the society safe. But according to research, we found out that not the severity of punishment, but the certainty of punishment that will control crime. So I think those who have a wrong path in life deserve a chance to start again. So if we're thinking of retribution, it will go on as a vicious cycle. But if we start believing in forgiveness and restoration, maybe we'll have the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tan Kittipong and Jeremy. So it's 12:40. So it's time for continuing our conversation over lunch. And we're going to have lunch for 1 hour, 20 minutes. It's actually happened in the basement. So you have to go down with the escalators, I think 2 times. And then you will see the lunch area there. So please be back on time at 2 o'clock. And I would like to request one more time a big hand for our panelists. See you all at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much. Kapo Makap.